The Window really, I think, is one of Hollywood's finest suspense films, and it was produced at RKO, filmed on location in New York in 1947. The picture was based on Cornell Woolrich's short story, The Boy Cried Murder, as adapted by screenwriter Mel Donnelly. I am absolutely thrilled that Barbara has agreed to join us here tonight. She'll join us after the movie. Although everyone reflexively recalls Barbara as Della Street on Perry Mason, there is a lot more to her career than that, and I know she looks forward to discussing it with us after the film. Now, Barbara, you had told me just out in the lobby it had been 75 years since you had seen this film.
65.
65 years, okay. I don't want to date you. 65 years. Now, one of the things that we had talked about was the fact that, you know, it was the whole motif of shooting in New York, and it was supposed to be during the summer and hot and sweaty, but it really wasn't like that, was it?
You can't believe it. It was so cold. I want to tell you, everybody there, is this okay? Can you hear me?
A little bit higher.
A little bit higher.
A little lower. There you go. You're good. And you told me you were going to keep this clean.
Shame on you.
But it wasn't hot.
No, it wasn't. Honestly, everybody that you saw out on the street, we all had long underwear on, sometimes 2 pair. It was below zero. Really, when we were shooting that.
This was November in New York City, and it was cold.
And it was snowing. They put a hood, like a tent top, over us. And as we would walk, I don't know why the snow didn't show. Truly, I really don't understand that. I think they did some trick at the studio. You're not supposed to know that, of course. But anyway, it was so cold, and we had our breath. You know, in the cold, cold weather, you have the
vapor.
The vapor coming up. So we would either have to take a deep breath and hold it. Smile. Not breathing. Try that. And if we had to talk at all in a scene, we'd have ice. We'd put ice in our mouth because that would chill our mouth. So it was as cold as it was outside.
Oh.
And when, I must tell you about Bobby, when he was up on the roof, you know, when they were chasing the little fella? Yeah. Well, think what you may, it was so cold that there were ice puddles all over that roof. And they tried to clean them off before the folks started running on that chase. They fell so many times, and we'd have to do a retake because ice puddles formed on the ceiling of the roofs.
The roof of the tenements, yeah.
Of the tenants,
yeah. The tenements house.
And it's amazing what we folks do that you don't know about.
Speaking about you folks, one of the, I mean, it was a terrific cast. All of you were terrific, but I think Arthur Kennedy was just a superb actor. What was Arthur like to work with?
Arthur was such a gentleman and such a dear man, and very truthfully, when we were working on stage, he was so true to life and normal that actually he seemed more like an actor when we weren't shooting than he did when we were shooting, you know. It was a delightful, we had a delightful time. And Ruth Roman was my dear friend, and she's gone now. I miss her terribly. But we had a wonderful time being there in New York together. And while we were shooting, we would meet each other when we had the time. But and be girls, you know, coffee up a little bit.
Yeah.
And the reason that I didn't have an awful lot of time when we were not shooting, I had our first child, our little girl, Jody, and she was 3 months old, and I took her with me when we went back. I took Jody, and Willie, my husband, was with too. So we lived in New York for 3 months while we were shooting that picture. And Jody started crawling in that time. And I thought, I'll never forget this picture. I'll never forget it. I did though, because I just, I just watched it for the first time, truthfully, since we shot it. And
well, it holds up remarkably well. And talking about your family, let's go back a few years and talk about how the head of RKO actually came to Chicago to sign you, Mr. Charles Corner, a lot of people have forgotten his name, but he really kind of saved RKO during the World War II years.
Yeah.
What was that like, having the head of a studio come by
I
and
was
see you?
terrified, you know, very honestly. I was going to art school and modeling a little bit and working for my teacher as a model after school for an hour. And he had a cartoon strip on their Sunday papers, and the picture was Ramblin' Bill. And believe me, I still have one of the sheets, one of the sides that he did. And so I can always say, as we used to back in my day, I'll see you in the funny papers. But I was in the funny papers.
So when Mr. Kohner signed you, was it a big transition coming from Chicago, DeKalb to good old Hollywood and RKO Studios?
Oh, yeah, my mom, I said, Mother, what do you think about that? She said, Barbara, do you want to go out to that? You know that Hollywood is
Sin City.
You have to be careful. That's a kind of a bad place to go. And I said, no, it's going to be fine. And Mr. Kerner asked me, when we met at the train, he said, Barbara, would you like to come out to Hollywood? And I'm sorry to be so innocent, shall we say, at that time. But he said, would you really like to come out to Hollywood? And I said, well, Mr. Kerner, if you really want me to work, I would love to work for you. I mean...
no casting couch.
I didn't say that, but he understood what I was saying. He said, well, honey, you're going to be safe. Don't worry about that. I said, well, my mother was worried. And he said, no. We have a lovely apartment there called the Studio Club. So that's the YWCA in Hollywood. And they called it the Studio Club. And when I went out, I lived there for 1 year before I left and moved in with some friends.
For that, I know when you got to RKO, they really kept you busy. You were in films with Tom Conway, The Falcon Goes Out West, and you were in a Val Lewton film. I remember seeing it and said, there's Barbara on the subway when someone got on. But I think the first film that you got billing was West of the Pecos with the one and only Robert Mitchum. And that was an important film because I think you met your husband on that film, or you were stalking him at that point.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Tell us about Mitchum, first of all.
Oh, Mitch was just turned out to be a very dear friend all of the years I was in show business until he passed away, and I miss him terribly. But he was the biggest tease. You folks have remembered Bob Mitchum. Oh. Let me tell you, thank you. I love that. Bob was the honorest thing. He was just full of the devil, honestly. And we'd be in the commissary, and he always teased me because I was new to the business and what have you. Anyway, he would be at one end of the commissary, or where we had lunch and dinner. I'd be at the other, just accidentally. I'd see him, I'd say, hi, and he'd stand up and he said, hey, Hale. I said, yeah, Bob. He said, you getting any? Can you imagine? I think that's the first time I ever slouched down.
Do I know this man?
And tried to hide. But we had a wonderful time in the show, West of the Pecos. I played a boy in part of that show, and I wanted to do that part so bad. But the producer said, Barb, there's no way. There I was in those days in a little pinafore and bobby socks and roaming around. He said, honey, there's no way you can be a little boy. I said, well, and I went to wardrobe. I dressed as a boy. I put makeup on like a boy. I put my hair up under a cowboy hat, got myself a cigar and a newspaper, and went up to his office and sat in his office for hours. And he would come out of his room and go out, and pretty soon he'd be coming back again. And Anne, his secretary, was sitting across from me, and she knew it was me, but she wouldn't say anything. And finally he said, Anne, who's that guy over there? And she said, I don't know. And so he went into his room and he buzzed her and said, send the fellow in. And so I was very pleased. I went in and I said, how do you do, sir? And he said, how do you do, sir? What can I do for you? What are you sitting around here at the office for so long? I said, well, I wanted to talk to you about something. And he said, yes, sir, what is it? I said, I pushed my hat off, my hair fell down. I said, I really want to do that part as a boy.
And so you did.
I got it. What a thrill.
Wonderful.
But the best part of the show was that I knew I had been at RKO long enough that I knew my director, who was his name was Ed Killey. And I went over and I said, Mr. Killey, will you do me a favor? And he said, sure, Barbara, I'll do what I can. I said, see that blonde guy over there? And he looked over and he said, yeah, Bill Williams. I said, yes. He said, well, what do you want? I said, do you have a part in the picture for him? And he said, not really. Do you want him to be in the picture? And I said, yeah, I really do, Ed. And he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, there's a part in the front where the wagon comes in. He could be riding on the wagon, and then he'd have to be there till the end of the show, all the time we're shooting. Is that good, Barbara? Oh, yeah, that's wonderful. Well, that was the beginning, and it took me 2 years from that time. And then I married my fella.
So
we were married for 36 years. I can't tell you what a lovely fella he was. Just the sweetest smile and the best daddy. We had 3 children, and I miss him terribly. That's it. It was a wonderful marriage.